All right, let's get started today. Welcome to the CHIP Landmark Idea Series. And today we are extremely pleased to have Alex Wiltschko, the CEO of Osmo and entrepreneur in residence at Google Ventures. The talk is the cognitive revolution, entering an era of automating both muscles and minds. I'm Ken Mandel. I direct the Computational Health Informatics program at Boston Children's Hospital, and the program was founded in 1994. It's a multidisciplinary applied research and education program, and you can learn more about us at www.chip.org. This is an event series featuring thought leaders across healthcare, informatics, IT, big science, innovation, and more. You can follow along at our Twitter handles. And the run of show is that I will introduce Alex briefly. He will then give his presentations. Put your questions into the Zoom Q&A box at the bottom as we go, and then we'll have a few quick closing remarks. So Alex is the CEO of Osmo, a company which is digitizing scent. It's one of the most exciting ventures that I've seen in the AI space and in the startup space. He's an entrepreneur in residence at Google Ventures. He joined the life sciences team at Google in 2022, where he is focused on advancing the field of digital olfaction. He's also the co-host of the Theory and Practice podcast alongside Google Venture partner Anthony Philippakis. The podcast features conversations at the cutting edge of biology and computer science. He was a staff research scientist at Google Research, where he worked at the intersection of machine learning and biology since 2017. And so you've got his trajectory from science and academia to Google Research and out into this new venture. And with that introduction, I would like to turn it over to Alex.
Thanks, Ken. First of all, appreciate having me here. It's truly an august group of speakers, so I hope I can live up to what I'm sure the insights and wisdom that you'll hear in the rest of the series. But congratulations on getting such a great group of speakers in the entirety of the symposium. And again, thanks for having me here. So I guess a little bit more about who I am, so you can contextualize what I'm going to tell you about here. And then I'll give you a sense of what I want to talk about, and then we'll dive in. So my background, just for a little bit more color, is definitely in academia, raised by two academics, fully trained all the way through PhD in olfactory and behavioral neuroscience, and then switched gears just a couple years earlier than this whole AI thing took off, because much smarter than people than me are now in this field. I don't think I would have gotten a leg in if I'd started later. I ended up starting and selling two AI companies, one to Nomura, one to Twitter. I ended up at Twitter. And I mentioned that because I was in the boiler room, applying artificial intelligence on very large problems in their data centers and in their ads platforms. And then I moved to Google Brain, now Google DeepMind, where I led compiler projects, did applied AI research, and then started and led the digital olfaction team there for 6 years. So I've kind of followed the arc, I suppose, of AI, both in terms of very, very pragmatic business applications, and then all the way fully academic basic research. And then now I work at the intersection of applied artificial intelligence and scent. So that's what I am working on in my day job. I'll tell you how this all fits into the story, but first I want to talk about what's happening now. There's a lot of the pace of progress is incredibly high. There's a lot of hype that's out there. And I think in general, the key to predicting the future, if you care to do so, is first to accurately perceive the present. then we can decide what we want to do about our predictions and what decisions that we want to make. So I'll tell you what I think is happening. AI is no longer a curiosity. That's almost a glib statement at this point in time. We used to call it machine learning. Before that, we called it statistics. And now it seems like it's okay for us to openly call it AI. That was a bit of a trigger word or a buzzword a few years ago. So there's this whole world of scientific inquiry in the field of artificial intelligence. But the big breakthrough in the past few years is what we're calling large language models. And I know this is going to be very rote for a lot of people in the audience, but it's good just to establish our baselines here. These are extremely large models, so big that only large resource industrial research groups can effectively actually do R&D on them. And these models, these LLMs, they predict the next word. That's what they do, right? But they're so good at predicting the next word, given past words, that, and they do this for chains of hundreds of thousands of words, that they're starting to get kind of spooky. So, I personally use ChatGPT as much as I use Google these days to retrieve information from our shared pool of species level knowledge, but they're far from perfect, right? They still make stuff up. They get stuck in loops. And another point of fact is the engine, the algorithm that really is driving these LLMs is called the transformer. And this algorithm is used in many more places than just language. And it seems to be the next generation of universal pattern extractor. It works on multiple types of data at state-of-the-art levels, from text to images to audio to chemistry and more. And the way I think of this, an analogy I'm going to draw several times here is, the electric motor was breakthrough, and it was a universal way of converting latent energy in the form of electricity into kinetic energy. And I think we should think of the transformer, these algorithms, as a breakthrough and universal way of converting latent information into predictions and decisions. And as important as oil was for the incredible amount of latent energy that we learned how to unlock and transform to electricity and mechanical work, data of all kinds is now important for its latent information that we transform into perception, that we transform into prediction, and that we transform into decision. So it's not a new concept, but it's worth stating. Data is the new oil. It has been, it is now, it will be, and only increasing in importance. So the backdrop here is the world seems to be moving faster than ever before, and there's some existential dread. Now that computers can do more and more, what does it really mean to be human? And I want to talk today about a previous era that was as mind-bending as the current, and draw lessons from that era and apply them to today. And what I'm just being fully transparent and honest, what I'm going to talk to you about today, I view as an essay in the truest sense, which really just means an attempt. So this is something I've been thinking about for a while, but what I'm telling you today is my attempt to make sense of the world. So you'll excuse me if I make errors in my judgment, or if I get things wrong, because one of the hardest things to do is just to see the current moment clearly. And I'm sure that I've stumbled here and there in trying to do so, but let's dive in. The first thing I want to do is talk about another era, a period in our species that brought us all of the abundance that we enjoy today, eliminated widespread hunger, and gave us what humans a few hundred years ago would consider superhuman strength and capability. And that's the Industrial Revolution. It's a story of our species harnessing exponentially more amounts of energy from our environment, finding latent energy in oil, learning to transmit latent energy through electricity, and then converting it to useful work with machines like electric motors and gas turbines and internal combustion engines. And one piece of that story is electrification, right? It's just a piece of the Industrial Revolution, a relatively late piece, but that was a massive uptick in productivity in our economy. Previously, factories were organized around steam or water power with a single generator and a single drive shaft that spanned the length of the factory, and all the tools geared off of this central drive shaft. And all the energy that was needed for production was physically transferred via belts and cables and chains, and these things wore down regularly. And in 1882, electricity became a commodity. And that was because of Edison's new invention and this new infrastructure. And it was obvious, like, why not transfer energy over wires as opposed to shipping coal in, horse-drawn carts or in cars? And that would give you the ultimate flexibility, especially in the factory, because instead of arranging the factory floor according to what you could physically gear off of a central drive shaft, so work was organized according to physical need, you could actually just put the power directly into machines. And then you could organize the entire factory according to the order of production, right? That means each little piece of production had its own motor in it. And as obvious as electrification is in hindsight, the adoption was actually very, very slow. So in 1890, nearly 80% of power from manufacturing was produced by steam. And it wasn't until 1920 that electricity took the majority. So that's 30 years. And it wasn't until 1930 when electricity constituted 80% of manufacturing power. So that is a full 40 years to flip the source of energy. So why did it take so long? Right, as a transformative invention, it was obviously better. Yes, distribution had to increase, efficiency had to increase, several inventions in long distance power transfer and new types of engines. But the main reason is cultural. You had to rearrange your factory floor, right? You had to change your organizational structures to take advantage of it. And we'll return to this because right now we're in a new era of automation and there's a new equivalent of rearranging your factory floor to take advantage of these new inventions. So the Industrial Revolution, when you look at the whole thing, right, which really started in the late 1700s and then completed in its current form in the early 1900s, what was the impact of that? So I mentioned that most manufacturing power was done by steam in the 1800s. That's a breakdown of all the non-muscular energy that was being used. But in fact, in 1860, the split was about 50-50 between steam and water for non-biological power sources, but 90% of all mechanical work was done by muscles. And here my source is a really lovely set of books by Vaclav Smil called Transforming and Creating the 20th Century. Actually, I would recommend reading everything by Vaclav Smil. I think he's amazing if you care about industrial history. So in 1860, 90% of mechanical work was done by muscles. 100 years later, 1960, it was 10%. Today, it's obviously going to be much lower. So in a corollary to that is in the 1800s, the fastest a signal could travel over land was the fastest a horse could run. And the most weight that could be lifted or pulled was limited by the strongest ox or team of oxen. So today, that has not changed. If you only look at biological power, very few people can even lift their own body weight. I can't, right? Everybody can push the button on an elevator though. If you look at the weight limit there, it's usually about 2 tons. So everybody can lift 2 tons, easy. That's a tremendous revolution. It's pervasive and it's a bit mind-bending. And it did cause a massive psychological upheaval. In fact, the best book chronicling what were then contemporary accounts of the Industrial Revolution and its effect on society is titled Pandemonium, because that's what it was, to give you a sense of what it was like. So if we were to boil it all down, what really changed? What changed is our ability to convert energy from a stored format, like a jug of oil, into a useful format, like a spinning drive shaft or electricity over a wire. And there's 2 pieces to this. And I'm drilling into this era. Again, I just want to contextualize because we can learn a lot from what happened with mechanical work and then apply it later to what's happening today. So there's 2 pieces. There's the energy feedstock, where you get your energy from, and then prime movers. And so I know this stuff is over 100 years old, but these principles are relevant. So prime movers are the things that actually can convert energy into kinetic action, like an engine. And energy conversions are the very basis of life. Modern history really can be seen as a rapid sequence of transitions to new energy sources. And the most common definition of energy is the capacity for doing work, right? Where it's like physically moving something. So the energy feedstock and prime mover combinations have been the main drivers of societal change. So first, we got energy from food and human labor, our own muscles was the prime mover. That's been flat in productivity for a long time. And then it was food and farm animals. And then it was water and water wheels and wind and windmills. And we started using the energy from fossil fuels and things really took off, right? Coal combined with steam engines, refined petroleum combined with gas turbines, and then the internal combustion engine. And then we got electric motors and electricity. And that's the era that we're in today in terms of mechanical work. So the feedstock is what contains latent energy, like moving water or oil, and the prime mover is what converts latent to kinetic energy, and that's what ultimately underlies the abundance that we have in the society. And this results in a world where now only a small fraction of mechanical labor in the world is done by our muscles. Most of it is done by machines. We are in a new era of automation, and it's, I think, no smaller than the Industrial Revolution, and I would call it the cognitive revolution. We are now mechanizing thought. And I think this is a new phase of the Industrial Revolution. If nearly all cognitive work was done by a mind in 1960, what will it be in 2060? What is it today? I don't have a breakdown of that. But if you've ever used a weather forecast, and those kicked in as soon as computers kicked in, or if you've traded a stock based on projected earnings, or you've clicked a digital ad, or you've been approved or denied a loan, you've already interacted with the machine that automates cognitive work. ChatGPT is just the latest example in a long parade of tools that can mechanize thought and help to formulate decisions. So we're in a monumental period in our society and our species. And I think it comes down to the fact that recently we crossed a threshold. We've passed the Turing test, right? And I think it's important to stop and appreciate that. Like, we're talking a lot about what these algorithms could do, but the holy grail for many decades and generations has been this Turing test idea, which is, can a computer fool you into thinking that it's human? And the answer is unequivocally yes right now. So there's a few papers to highlight, although there's been many looking into this, into the capabilities of the most recent large language models. Jakesh et al. 2022 shows that modern large language models produce more human than human text, right? And they do human trials for that. I believe it's in JAMA, Ayers et al. 2023 shows that chatbots actually have a more empathetic bedside manner, at least in terms of what they're writing, compared to human doctors. Bill Gates, in an essay that he titled "The Age of AI Has Begun," shares one of his first experiences with this modern rollout of chatbots. And what he and a group of people in a room asked it is, what to say to a father with a sick child. And the quote from Bill is, it wrote a thoughtful answer that was probably better than most of us in the room would have given. The whole experience was stunning, right? So we cannot tell language generated by a human from that generated by a computer. Just go ask the college professors that you know who are receiving essays from students. In some cases, we'd actually prefer the work by the computer. So we're now seeing this tilt akin to the shift from muscles to machines in mechanical work. We're seeing the beginning of the tilt from minds to software. As a side note, we should be thrilled, right? Our bodies and our minds are phenomenal Swiss Army knives of capability, but there is no better form of progress. There's no, better paved route to abundance than to externalize our capabilities and to lever ourselves up. So I don't think we should care how mechanical or cognitive work was done. We should be thrilled that we could get it done faster and we could get it done cheaper. So to me, it's asking whether a crank has been turned by a muscle or a turbine. I think it's inevitable. So the other thing to note is this has been happening for a long time. This has been a long time coming. If you've ever grabbed your umbrella, right, because of a weather forecast, as I mentioned, you've used cognitive automation. If you've ever used autocorrect or autosuggest or Google search or Excel spreadsheet macros or clicked on a watch next suggestion from YouTube, those were all cognitive automation examples. Similarly, if you ever get into an Uber or you yourself follow GPS driving directions, you have fully outsourced a part of your cognition to a machine. Right? You are not really deciding what to do. You're being told what to do. You've outsourced your cognition. So, how do we think about this? Right? It really was a psychic break in the past industrial revolution to accept the idea that mechanical work could be done by things that weren't living. That was incredibly hard. It was existentially damaging and difficult to comprehend. And we're going through the same thing right now. So what does it mean here? How do we think about this? Let's start to link those concepts of energy and energy feedstock and prime mover to the concept of cognitive automation and the cognitive revolution. So if the industrial revolution was about energy, if it was about the capacity for work or the capacity to move mass, then the cognitive revolution is about information. And information is the capacity to decide between alternatives. Now, I mentioned we can think of this punctuated progress of the industrial revolution in terms of the energy feedstocks and the prime movers that utilize them. So there's three main ideas that we have to translate from the realm of the mechanical to the realm of the cognitive, and that's energy, energy feedstock, and prime mover. So energy is the capacity to do work, to displace matter. Information is the capacity to decide, to eliminate alternatives. It's a capacity to decide between alternatives. Energy feedstock are sources of energy that we can divert and store and convert. So we can dig up a chunk of coal, we can store it in a bucket, we can burn it when we need to release the energy. Information feedstock are sources of information that we can divert, store, and convert as well. That's data. Information feedstock is data. We can measure people's interactions online, right? So an information feedstock is digitally mediated behavior. And there are companies that mine that and then refine it. We can store those interactions on a hard drive, and then we can extract patterns with statistical models to predict the future. So one caveat, I don't know how to answer this, but while we could easily calculate the energy density of a fuel in kilojoules, we can calculate the bit density of data in gigabytes, but it's not quite right because sometimes it's very compressible, or sometimes there's no patterns, it's just random, right? So information seems a little more complicated as a beast than energy, at least to me at this moment. So that's energy feedstock. And then we have prime movers, right? Like the engines. So prime movers convert latent energy to mechanical work, and they displace matter. That's what they do. So prime movers convert latent information to, prime thinkers convert latent information to decisions between alternatives. So the engines of thought convert latent patterns, latent information into perceptions or predictions or decisions. They eliminate some patterns and they highlight others. It's a little abstract. So, we might ask, what's actually getting automated in this era, right? What are the fundamental actions of cognition? I'm probably going to get this wrong, but let me offer a sacrificial concept. With information and its use in prime thinkers or cognitive engines, we're automating three things. Perception. So when we use sensors to take in information about the world, the sensors report one state of the world, but not myriad others. And perception is about probing the world and seeing what's not happening, eliminating alternative realities. So we can use sensors to gather information about the world and then to act on it. Prediction, right? So when we've got perception down, when we have a current state of the world, we want to think about what the future is, right? In fact, we're doing this constantly. When we see each other, we're not even doing this face to face, right? We're doing this on a tape delay of at least 30 to 100 milliseconds behind reality. That's just how our brains work. That's how synaptic transduction works. Our brain is constantly predicting the present moment and possible future moments from tape delayed information. So core to every human endeavor, whether it's solo or it's in large organizations, we're always looking to predict what's going to happen next. We always want to reduce uncertainty. It's a very fundamental human drive. And in a business context, questions like, will someone click on this button? That's critical. It's $1 trillion question. Will someone get better if they get this medicine? That's critical. That's $1 trillion question. So perception, prediction, and then decision. So given our perception of the present moment, and based on that, we can predict what the future might hold. And at that point, we have to decide to take actions to influence reality. We have to choose between alternative actions and execute one. So the equivalent of a gas turbine or the engine for the mind help us automate perception, prediction, and decision. And instead of displacing mass, our prime thinkers displace or eliminate possible alternative choices. So if I'm perceiving red, I'm not perceiving all other colors. If I'm predicting a yes, I'm eliminating a no. If I'm deciding to go left, I'm not going right. So the prime movers, there's just a small set of them. There's the gas turbine, there's the electric motor, there's the internal combustion engine. Those are the fundamental ones. What are the prime thinkers that help us predict and decide? These are the algorithms that underlie some of the largest companies in the world. And the algorithms are, you'd probably be familiar with them if you've taken a stats course. It's linear regression for prediction, and it's logistic regression for decision. Those are the absolute fundamental prime thinkers in this world. And we just call them models, right? So I'm gussing these things up in bigger language, but that's what these things are doing. They're taking patterns, they're extracting them, and they're helping us predict the future, or they're helping us decide between alternatives. And this whole world of neural networks and fancy deep learning, they're really just elaborations based on these tools. And they're very fancy elaborations, very expensive ones, but at their core, they are regression tools, they're classification tools. So the most elaborate and ascendant prime thinker today is what I mentioned before. It's an algorithm called the transformer. It seems to work on every modality that we throw data at. It was invented at my previous employer, Google Brain. It's at the heart of all LLMs like Bard and ChatGPT in basically every modern production AI system. It is a universal pattern converter, right? It can take latent information and turn it into predictions and decisions better than anything else that we've discovered so far. Just like engines are made of gears and drive shafts, those transfer energy from different parts of the engine to other parts of the whatever the device is. That's for transferring mechanical energy. The equivalent in information is the matrix multiplication operation. And that's how you transfer information trivially and ubiquitously within all these models. And the kind of chip that is really good at matrix multiplication is the GPU, or graphics processing unit. And NVIDIA is the company that supplies most of the world's cognitive gears and drive shafts. So that's kind of how I view them in the modern context. Now, the field of AI is inventing new prime thinkers and new elaborations and configurations of these things all the time. They're connecting them in new ways every week. And the fact that we're actually iterating at this pace and that we're coming up with fundamentally new ways of doing things on the scale of, one a year, it seems, that means that we're in the middle of this revolution right now. The pace of progress tells us that this is happening right now. And I would suggest that's why the present moment feels like a whirlwind, because it is. So you might ask, are we moving too fast? Right? Are we flying blind as we automate cognition? And this is a serious question. And the leaders of the field have asked this, and an open letter supposedly signed by many AI luminaries actually suggested a moratorium on AI research of a certain kind. Jeff Hinton, the godfather of deep learning, recently retired from Google and went on a doom and gloom speaking tour in the press, suggesting that we've lost control of these things, or we might. In the Industrial Revolution, we understood the physics of machines. But do we now understand the physics of intelligence or the physics of thought? Do we even understand these machines, like at a scientific level, these prime thinkers, these intellectual engines that we're making? And here again, I think it's useful to draw from history and look at the steam engine, particularly the Watt engine, which was a big jump in efficiency. They were so efficient that they outstripped the theoretical understandings of how to explain them. And the field of statistical mechanics, led by Gibbs, was basically invented to try to figure this out, and it narrowed the gap. But we've got to be very clear that the inventions themselves, the physical things doing the work and changing the world, came before the math to explain them, came before the detailed scientific understanding. The math later was incredibly useful to improve them, but we invented before we fully understood. So if our own muscles can't move faster than machines, we can't expect our own minds to catch up with some of the cognitive automations that we're building. And a different way to say that is, if your mind can perform the calculations and predictions a model can, that means your mind can do the cognitive work of a model, of a prime thinker. And if you were a horse and the model were an engine, that means the model would have 1 horsepower. You want more powerful models. We should want them. We want elevators, bicycles, drive shafts, gas turbines of the mind, things that will give us an IQ of 10,000, just like engines give us the equivalent of hundreds of horsepower, right? So fundamentally, these prime thinkers and these new sources of data are just tools. Yes, they can be used for good and for bad. That's true of any new technology, even a car, right? A car does great good, it can do great evil. But the question is, will they get up and walk away, right? Will these systems that we're building acquire a will? I would strongly come down on the side of no. I'm not going to belabor the point, but the thing to watch out for is who has their hand on the controls. And what are their human intentions and frailties? That's what it's going to come down to. It has always come down to that for technology and will be this way for these new tools, certainly as well. So these machines are powerful. The software that we're building today is powerful, but they're glorified power tools. Right? It matters who's using them and what for. So we've mechanized muscles. We are in the process of mechanizing cognition. So in this era, as we look out to the future, what's possible? What's going to change? And this is me speculating at this point, but I'd love to have a conversation with folks and see what other folks think. Work is going to change. Some jobs will go away, those that can be routinely performed by software. But this is always a creeping horizon. It always is. As the tools get better, a job that was defined by doing a specific task that can be trivially done by the tool, the job transforms. The replaced jobs will transform folks into users of new tools. So for instance, manual photo retouchers, that used to be a job, like physical, actual darkroom retouching. There's now people that use Photoshop. Further, folks that generate and manipulate images just as a profession will probably be using generative AI to make entire images from whole cloth, even videos that's just starting to work, that are tailor-made for whatever people's needs are. That will probably be democratized. So there's still someone at the controls, right? But the thing that they're controlling has just gotten a massive upgrade, right? I think education will change. I don't know how, but the analogy I would draw is that math teachers protested when the calculator became cheap enough for students to have. You can actually go find newspaper clippings in the generation ago. But who cares now, right? The same is true for LLMs. Writing a cogent short essay on a known topic is now trivial. Do not expect that genie to go back in the bottle. It's not. If you're teaching classes in college, you probably already know that this is the case. We have to figure out how to adapt and harness this and assume this is a capability people have, not a capability people have to be trained in. I don't know what the right answer is here, but there is now a power tool for cognitive automation that will write you cogent essays on known topics, and it can't be uninvented. So I think people will change. If you give everybody an LLM, they have access to more knowledge faster, and now they're able to write better. They're able to summarize better, judge better. So it's possible that we're going to have organizations filled with people that get an extra 50 IQ points by virtue of the tools that they use. This is available to everyone. So I think firms and groups that lean into this will outcompete those that don't. The question that I think is natural is, what's left for people to do if these cognitive tools are taking more and more. Let's look again at the mechanization of muscles. Dexterous manipulation is still left for us. Artistic craft is still left for us. And also people just use these tools when they're convenient. So there's a great interview or essay with Stephen Wolfram, who's a physicist and inventor and entrepreneur. And he says, it's pretty obvious that we can automate many of the things that we humans have been proud of for a long time. So the question is, what's the future of the human condition in this situation? And more particularly, and that's him speaking, see technology as taking human goals and making them able to be automatically executed by machines. The human goals that we've had in the past have been things like moving objects from here to there, using a forklift rather than our own hands. Now the things we can do automatically are more intellectual kinds of things that traditionally have been the profession's work, so to speak. These are things that we're going to be able to do by machine. The machine is able to execute things, but something or someone has to define its goals and what it should be trying to execute. And the way I think about this is differentiating a task and asking whether it's a puzzle or it's a problem. So puzzles can be arbitrarily difficult challenges where there's a single known answer that can be verified. And usually puzzles are constructed by another person, so they're synthetic. Problems are different than that. Problems might have no answer. They might have 100 answers. And you might not even be able to definitively verify their solution. And often the hardest part is phrasing the problem correctly, asking the right question. So solving a riddle is a puzzle, right? It could be arbitrarily difficult. A firm surviving in a competitive market is a problem. A scientist working to cure a disease is a problem. A doctor treating a patient with a complicated history is a problem, right? It's unclear what the answer is. There might be multiple good answers. You don't know if you got it right, usually. Let's give all the puzzles to computers, as many of them as we can. And people should be focused on solving problems, which at its essence is asking the right question and trying to get to a hard solution. So I think beyond changes at the individual level, new organizations are possible. This is really speculative, but companies will look different when they incorporate AI. So there's a great HBS article on this topic about a digital operating model. I'd encourage you to seek it out and to read it. But in order to really adopt cognitive automation, you have to rearrange accountability, decision-making, lines of effort. So this is why either really dramatic reorganizations or making a new company are required to be successful here. The company structure has to be different to incorporate these insights. I won't dwell too much on this, but the structure of organizations have already been revolutionized multiple times by changes in communication technology. So sealed letters allowed for trusted action at a distance. The telegram allowed for nearly instant communication, right? Previously, the fastest way to communicate, fast as the message could travel, was a horse. And similarly, email replacing paper memos put the ability to do this broadcast, this instant broadcast of arbitrarily complex information into the hands of each and every employee. So full point-to-point communication. All those help to increase the speed of trusted communication. And I'll leave a suggestion that LLMs will have an equal impact because they're really good at taking long pieces of text and compressing them into shorter summaries. They can do many things, but they're really, really good at this. So you could imagine doing other things beyond that, beyond improving the compression of communication, whereas previous technological advances improve the latency of communication. You could train an LLM on all of the company's communications and all of their documents, effectively bringing the company to life as a chatbot, and maybe even layering on a personality. And then you could talk to the company. You could talk to the firm as if it were a colleague, asking how it's doing, what it's working on, what it's worried about, what it's excited about. So have these things been done today? No. Are they possible? Yes. Do I expect them to be done? Yes. So those are just a few thoughts of how I think things will be changing on into the future. And I guess, what else is next? Just as a framing, we weren't able to move mountains or even conceive of such a thing until not that long ago in our species history. Like a mountain was a feature of a landscape. It wasn't something that we could interact with meaningfully. Now we can jolt to the bottom of them. We can cut right through them. We can carve famous people's faces into them. We can even fully flatten them if we really put our minds and our resources to it. That is emblematic of the power of the physical energy and mechanical work that we've harnessed. So what's the equivalent of moving mountains for cognitive work? What feats have we not even imagined as possible, but just as a feature of the landscape that we can now achieve? I don't know the answer. We've harnessed a great deal of latent energy in the world, and there's obviously a lot more to go, possibly with fusion. And in the analogy of joules and bits, what latent information is out there, right? So I don't know the answer to these things, but it's now the time to start asking these questions. So there's 3 elements that we've talked about to what I think is the cognitive revolution. There's information feedstocks, there's prime thinkers, right? The 2 elements. And we just call those data and models these days. And new models are being built all the time. The question is, what new sources of latent information have we not tapped yet, right? What other forms of informational oil are out there? We've already seen massive companies built on mining our attention. That's a massive feedstock, human behavior captured online. Plenty of data companies hoover up and organize information for our use. Some of them even predate widespread adoption of the internet, like CoStar, which provides real estate information, or NPD, which provides consumer purchasing behavior information. So I'll tie back what I've talked about today with what I'm doing in my day job, and what I'm dedicating my life to. And that's about untapped sources of information. So I started Osmo, which is on a mission to give computers a sense of smell, to digitize what I think is the largest untapped source of information on the planet, which is the chemical world around us, the sense around us. Just as an example, if you come home late for dinner after the dishes and pans are put away, you can still smell what was on the menu. Right? And as you walk down the street, you're getting a chemical record of all the living things and products that shed material into the air, even in very minuscule quantities. So in every cubic inch of air around us, there's a chemical history written into it. Every piece of air has thousands of unique chemical compounds in it, many of which we can consciously perceive, some of which we subconsciously perceive, and some of which we cannot. And many of these chemicals were put out into the air in a designed fashion to influence us, to tug on our behavior. And we like it that way, actually. Smell of food makes us hungry, and demonstrably, we eat more when we're hungry and we smell food. The smell of loved ones comfort us. We might keep a t-shirt tucked in our bed when they go away on a trip. Right? That's changing the chemical composition of the air around us for a behavioral or emotional end. And these are all emotional and powerful signals, and they're specified entirely by the precise blend of molecules that enter one of the most sensitive information gathering machines on the planet, which is our nose. So computers can see and they can hear, but they can't yet smell. And what I'm working on at Osmo is to take our first steps in digitizing this untapped source of information, which is our little piece that we're playing, what I think is a much, much larger arc of cognitive automation. Today, what we're doing is we're using AI to create new molecules, but what we need to be doing is reading, mapping, and writing. Today, we're mostly mapping and writing the whole world of scent. So again, I just think what we're doing is a piece of this much larger arc by building the prospecting and information extraction technology for an underappreciated and underexploited information feedstock. And I can certainly tell you more about that some other time. So I'll pause there.
All right, fantastic. So, Alex, you've drawn this incredible map through history since the 1800s or so to now, and you've analogized other industrial advances with the cognitive revolution. Let me ask start with a very specific question. The Turing test is accomplished. So in a sense, it's no longer relevant as a goal. What is relevant? What replaces the Turing test as we look forward now?
So I don't have the right answer for you. One thing I'll say is this isn't the first time we've had to kind of ask a new question. A colleague of mine, Hugo La Rochelle, calls this the receding horizon of intelligence. So when Deep Blue first got really good at playing chess and became the best chess player in the world, we opened it up and we actually could kind of understand what it did, and it didn't look very intelligent. It looked like brute force search, right, with a bunch of heuristics. This happened with AlphaGo, happened with AlphaStar, it's happening with LLMs and ChatGPT and Bard. Every time we actually tackle something that we consider to be the last frontier of intelligence, we learn two things. One is we solve it in a way that doesn't look very much like intelligence. It looks like a thing we understand, some algorithm with a lot of smarts and computational force behind it. And also we learned that the definition of what it takes to be really good at this thing, or what intelligence might be, actually gets subtler. It gets more fragmented. It gets higher resolution. So I expect this to keep going. We'll find some new goal, we'll achieve it, and we'll look at how we achieved it, be unsatisfied, and move on to the next thing. And this is a process that I don't see how it could possibly end. But along the way, we're getting these new capabilities, which I believe will, in the long run, really improve the abundance of life on Earth.
So let's just zoom in on that a little. So the Turing test has been passed. We know that in part of it is a party trick that these LLMs are doing, but a chess game is one thing, and here this very human interaction and often very helpful framing, suggestions, codes, rewrite, software coding, rewrites of your essays, generation of essays from scratch. It looks a lot like a human, and we're very susceptible to this Turing.
That's the key point,
phenomenon.
Susceptible.
And if you think about what our response is just to getting an emoji on a text, we can well up with a positive emotion when we see a heart come back in a message, much less these incredibly well-formed, extremely human-like responses and answers to prompts. So what's different, I think, between this and sort of AlphaGo and chess is that we're going to really be drawn in. So if we look in let's take it in the medical space, right? It's going to look a lot like medical advice. And in a lot of cases, it's going to be very good medical advice, particularly as GPT-4 gets access to large databases of electronic medical record information, including labs and notes. And it's going to really start to be able to answer some questions. We won't know what's accurate, what's not. We don't know now in the medical literature what's accurate and what's not. What's that balance between all the imperfections we have now, these new imperfections, and how we start to respond to them? We haven't responded in the medical profession to the existing imperfections in, let's say, clinical trial infrastructure and interpretation very perfectly. How do we start to think about this and develop some framework around what is the right behavior?
I think there's two really key points in what you said, which is what we already have is not perfect, and the challenge in improving it is going to involve like really highlighting exactly what's not working and exactly what we want. So the thing that's always driving change is some human intent, some human will. And it can often be very difficult to be specific about what it is that you want. And the issue of engineering a system to spit out the next word, we've gotten really good at that. But what we're not good at is engineering stories and compelling narratives that can cause large groups of people to change their behaviors in aggregate. These are two different domains of work, and I think there's a quote from E.O. Wilson which I really like, which is, what is it? We have futuristic weapons or tools. He was talking about nuclear war at the time, but I think we can talk about AI tools in this moment. We have futures tools. We have medieval institutions and Paleolithic emotions. And to me, that's the root of it, which is we're people. Wherever we go, no matter if we're on Mars or if we're here with futuristic technology, like we're still people. I think we're the same people that we were 1,000 years ago, which is why studying history is interesting. And the issues around organizational change are really unchanged, I think. We haven't really invented much in the realm of organizational technology for the last few hundred years.
Very interesting moment for us to be considering these issues. So let me take some questions from the Q&A now. Steve Strasman, who's a MIT-trained computer scientist, asks, how do you define accountability for these tools? With mechanical engines, the accountability lies with those who have their, quote, hands on the controls. But when a mortgage is denied or an autonomous vehicle causes a fatal accident, and clearly in the medical profession, I'll add in, if a diagnosis or recommendation is made, are we ready to hold the sponsors of these agents accountable? How do we start to sort that out?
So I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a policymaker. I don't have the answer to this. The way I think about using these tools in practice in my own ventures is really, like I mentioned, as power tools, right? I think there's room for full autonomy of some things in the environment, but almost always there's a human will that's driving one of these tools towards a task. And so that's how I think about the framework. In fact, as I design AI systems to get work done that I'm interested in, I'm always thinking about it as an ergonomics problem between the person and the tool, right? So the framework works really well for mechanical automation, where like there's somebody driving a power tool, literal engine. And I don't know the legal consequences of things that are more or less automated, right? But I think that mental framework of this is a tool being used by somebody is the right way to think about it. And frankly, I think that's the right way to think about it because that's the way that these things are the most effective in the world right now. So yeah, I guess I wouldn't want to venture an answer of what's right here because I don't know, but I would come down firmly in support of the framework that these are tools being used by people. And so we should look at it from that lens.
Question from Monica Jang. Data-driven and pro-change culture are clearly essential for organizations to be successful, even in these embryonic stages of digital transformation. How would you think organizations should engage in and embrace this paradigm shift? And this clearly applies in medicine, but it applies across industry. And, who's responsible for collecting this data?
So this is a huge question. I'm sure consultants are collecting large dollars on being change agents or on suggesting how this might be done. I know McKinsey has made a big deal out of this. Again, I don't know the answer. I do know that the new organization, which uses data effectively and throughout all of its organization, is fundamentally different than the old organization that does not. I would again recommend that HBS article, the digital operating model, or I think it's actually the book is called Competing in the Age of AI. It has some ideas about this. And the idea essentially is the operating model of a company isn't people that provide services, it's people that operate a digital platform that itself provides services. So there's a layer of disintermediation there, or there's a layer of abstraction there. In terms of how to get old organizations to think this way, I mean, one thing that I think a lot about is empowering the data collectors at the top level of the organization. So in Osmo, there is a head of data operations. That's different than biz ops. That's different than product. That's different than AI modeling. This person whose only job is to make sure that we're getting the best data in all the areas that are relevant for what we do. In the era of electrification, there were chief electricity officers. Andrew Ng has a great talk about this. But at the C-suite level, there was a person who was ultimately accountable for the use of a technology and the cultural changes required for its adoption. And I think something like that would be required is you have to have a C-suite role, you have to have C-level adoption, you have to have board support, because it's a huge cultural change. It's a creation of a new department. It's kind of cracking the cultural bones of what came before. So I don't know the answer, but it has to be prioritized at the highest level of the org, and it takes a long time and it's slow when an organization's already ossified or crystallized around a particular operating model.
Absolutely. And, those questions come up in healthcare in the around under the umbrella of conversations around governance, around accountability. But this is really, it really is going to require some new thinking. Here's another question. Energy is finite. Given the speed at which we're building and testing algorithms, and 100,000 models a day is listed here, we are consuming large amounts of energy. We can't solve all problems. What should be our priorities in order to reduce the impact on the planet and improve quality of life at the same time? where are the societal inputs on those decisions?
So that's a fantastic question. Just to add a bit more color to it, the estimates, and these are public estimates of how much energy is consumed by data centers worldwide is 1 to 1.5% of all the world's energy. Some fraction of that's doing AI, an increasing fraction, not all of it. Like, you're right. Like, this is a significant part of our species' energy usage. And in general, these decisions are made by private industry, as is the use of kinetic energy and potential energy, like the use of oil, the burning of oil, the use of engines. Those are decided mostly by private citizens. So again, these are great questions, and I don't have an answer. I don't have a framework to think about it. It is of increasing importance. What I would look to, at least how I would think about trying to understand this, is like, how did we do this in the last industrial revolution? How do we do this for energy? And then how should we do this for the exploitation and use of information? I don't have the answer. It's a great question for us to think about, though.
Here's one. It's nuanced. An economic recession occurred from the late 1830s to the early 1840s, when the adoption of the Industrial Revolution's early innovations, such as mechanized spinning and weaving, slowed and the markets matured. New technologies, such as the electrical telegraph, widely introduced in the 1840s and 50s, were not powerful enough to drive high rates of growth until the advent of assembly lines and the electrical grid became more commonplace. AI has also had several periods of time where new developments were slow and interest overall was low. And here's the question: how soon do you think these current technologies will mature? And when they do, will they be able to sustain growth to continue the rapid pace of progress, or will there be a time of pause and slowdown as these technologies mature and the progress turns to more fixing bugs rather than the new prime thinkers? This sounds to me like a paraphrasing of the Gartner hype curve a little bit, put into a historical context. What do you think? And thinking about the Gartner hype curve itself, does it apply here, or is this just a different kind of technology?
It's a good question. I think of a couple things here. I think of Clayton Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma. And in that book, he highlights that new technologies often outpace the market's needs. So often there's a technological oversupply with respect to what the market wants. And frankly, I think we're seeing that. I don't think there's actually any business models attached to large language models. I don't think anybody knows how they're going to make money off these things. The people that win are the people that sell the raw materials and the compute to support training these models, right? Like NVIDIA, Google Cloud, AWS, etc. Right? Those are the real winners in this. There will be applications for sure, because these models are going to get commoditized. So in terms of I guess how to think about pace of progress in this space, one thing that is a framework that I like is thinking about the S curve of the technology, which is like, all right, how is it ready to go yet? And then there's a pace of rapid innovation, and then it levels off, right? And progress, when you zoom out, actually looks exponential, because there's a bunch of these S curves stacked on top of each other. Like, if you look at the cost per candela of lighting, it's exponentially downwards, right? Like, it's cheaper. And what builds that curve out is an S curve of candles. Yes, there was actually a lot of technological progress in candles, then natural gas, and then electrical lighting, right? So where we are right now with respect to machine learning is, I think we've started to take off in this exponential bit, using the current tools that we have in ML, using this current wave, right? And there were previous waves, right? So there was the early statistical modeling of, that basically brought us linear regression and logistic regression. That's like old, that's like 1700s. And then we, more recently figured out how to apply these things on computers. And then we got things like support vector regression and support vector classification. And each of those had their little S curves where we figured out how to use them better. And actually, there's a bunch of different models and techniques. So we're climbing up one of these S curves, which is the transformer right now. That seems to be what's driving a lot of this technological progress. And I don't know when it's going to level off, but I do know we're in this like going up pretty fast phase. That doesn't tell you whether or not the market needs it. It doesn't tell you whether there's any business models that actually can, like, you can do value creation, but can you do value capture on this? So again, like, these are fantastic questions. We're asking about the future, and I don't know, but this is kind of how I would think about framing the perspective, at least.
Great. So as we wrap up, can you give us a little flavor? I know this isn't your first focus at Osmo, but can you talk for a moment about the sort of potentially revolutionary contributions of digitizing scent in the health domain?
Yeah, I'm very personally excited about this. The way that so first of all, scent is one of the first diagnostic modalities ever. Some diseases that we have are named after their taste or their smell, like diabetes mellitus. If you talk to any healthcare practitioner, they'll tell you that some diseases have a smell. I was talking with my friend the other day, he's a brain surgeon, and he said, there's like a brain death smell. You can smell it when you get called into a room to certify brain death, which he has to do as a neurosurgeon. It smells like brain death. And it's distinct from other diseases, other disease processes in the hospital. I think I am not a healthcare practitioner, but if you talk to people who are, I'm sure you will come up with stories like this. So disease has a smell and wellness has a smell. And it's not surprising that it does, frankly, because our insides are always getting out into our outsides, right? Through our breath, through our skin emanations, our urine, our feces, everything. The content of our breath or of these other emanations are the metabolic byproducts of the processes inside of our body. So some of what's inside of us, which is disease state or is wellness state, is going to be transmitted and be capturable and smellable, right? So that, I think, is the ultimate goal of what we're after. And then pulling it back into the arc of what we've been talking about today, AI advances, not one algorithm at a time, but one data set at a time. That's what really drives progress, because that's what enables the testing of these new prime thinkers, these new intellectual engines. And data sets advance one modality at a time. You can't automate what you can't perceive. And computers don't have access to the chemical world. And when we think about what it takes to digitize a sense, we've done this a few times, right? It's, most notably for vision and for hearing, although we have limited digitization of touch. You need to be able to read the world, turn atoms into bits. You need to be able to map the world, right? Process it, store it, compress it, like Photoshop or JPEG. And you need to be able to write it back out again. Right? You need to be able to turn the bits back into atoms, like a printer or a display. So that's what we're building at Osmo, is all of those three pillars and linking them together. And we're building them independently with some cross bridges in the early stages. And then we'll be linking these things together in the coming years. In that whole platform of being able to read and map and write the olfactory world, which is a very large slice of the chemical world, we think will be incredibly useful in the context of healthcare. It's not our first stop because that's the mountaintop, right? So what we're trying to do is build a business which is meant to last beyond my lifetime. I think there's more than a lifetime of work to do here. And so we're building strong commercial foundations in the industry of fragrance to start, which sounds prosaic, and it is, but all the technology that we need to build in order to solve those commercial problems are on a direct path, at least philosophically, towards solving these healthcare problems.
Very inspiring. And I hope we'll be able to check back in with you and hear about about your progress as you make it in this very newly launched and extraordinarily exciting company. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us at this, at this early stage in Osmo. And I think everyone who's been on this Zoom is going to think back and be pretty excited about how they got to hear you at this early phase as you
Too kind of you.
progress tremendously in this era, including me. Thank you, and I'm going to wrap up, and we hope to see you soon.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ken. Bye-bye.
Oops. And so, hold on. So I would just like to tell folks about the remainder of the booked series, which starts back up again in the fall. We've got Robert Langer coming in, and he is the most cited engineer in history, an institute professor at MIT. We've got Ian Lipkin, a virus hunter and the director of Center for Infection and Immunity at Columbia. Rick Burke, the co-founder and executive editor of STAT, one of the foremost medical publications. Tom Mayer, medical director at NFL Players Association, who has revolutionized safety for players in what really is a microcosm of healthcare and the various competing factors that conspire for and against health. Molly Ann Brody, director of public opinion and survey research at Kaiser Family Foundation. In the research program, if you may not know her name, but you know her work. Her opinion polls are reported in the mainstream media all the time. Toby Cosgrove, former CEO and current executive advisor of the Cleveland Clinic, one of the best known healthcare CEOs in a generation. And Christina Farr, former CNBC health tech reporter who owned that beat and now is a health tech investor. We would love to hear from you at the Computational Health Informatics program, chip.org. We hire postdocs. We'll be having a faculty search this fall. And thank you for joining.